Welcome to another podcast by InsideCarolina.com, the independent voice of UNC Sports, your home for Tar Heel football, basketball, and recruiting.
I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, joined by Ross Martin, Sherrell McMillan, and Greg Barnes. Greg freshly back from Chicago to see Carolina struggle against Kentucky, go down to the Wildcats in a game that not sure was actually as close as it looked at times. Carolina certainly had opportunity to get back into it late, and it just wasn't meant to be. Greg, I'll start with you first. I mean, on TV, it did not look like Carolina was able to match Kentucky's intensity, maybe physicality. What did you see in person?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think part of it is that that was really a pro-Kentucky crowd, surprisingly. North Carolina travels as well, if not better than most any school out there. But it was probably 2/3 Kentucky fans, it seemed like. I mean, the UNC had more boos when they came out, and it seemed Kentucky had cheers when they came out. And I think that had a part to do with it in terms of Kentucky being able to rally around that fan support. But I do think, yet again, we keep going back to this, is Roy harped on effort. And the players talked about it after the game. And it was really just kind of sloppy. And I think a couple things stood out to me. We can dive into a little bit more. But kind of after going back and listening to the audio from this game and then a couple games recently, it seems Roy is he's mad, but he's frustrated to the extent that this team is doing some really like high school level things, doing it over and over again. I mean, when you're talking about, I think it was the first pass of the game. It's just a one slide pass, and Kentucky sticks their hands in the passing lane, gets it, and goes down for a score. And you had multiple opportunities like that where Kentucky was able to take advantage of those poor, sloppy passes that were not confident passes, it seemed like. And then you had the situations where, Roy has talked over the years, time and time again, about, hey, we do not help up into the lane, right? You'd rather give a guy a 15-footer that's open than a dunk that's wide open. And yet we saw on 3 or 4 occasions UNC helping up the lane, and what happens? Reed Travis is able to take advantage, or I think Washington had one as well, underneath. So some things that you do not expect from a North Carolina team. And I don't care about the youth. I mean, we know they've got 3 veteran guys and a lot of younger guys surrounding them. But those are things that Carolina teams don't do. And that's before you get into talking about all the other issues this team has.
Ross, you certainly watched it on television like I did. Your overall thoughts on what you saw, and I mean, it sort of, to me, was a microcosm of the seasons thus far, but Kentucky was able to do what Kentucky wanted to do, which, like Greg said, it's very un-North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, Greg wrote a column about it, and I've tweeted about it, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, Tommy, on Twitter. But just the lack of a post present kind of reared its head on Saturday night. I thought Kentucky was more athletic, had longer, better players down low, and P.J. Washington and Reed Travis. And the fact that UNC doesn't have a go-to scorer down low, they needed those baskets. They needed some easy shots. They needed some easy twos to get back in the game in the second half, and they couldn't find those. They got out-rebounded, which you rarely see from a UNC team. And then Kentucky played above the rim many times throughout the game with some alley-oops, some putbacks, and UNC really didn't have a rim protector or any kind of answer for that defensively. And that's kind of been, I thought that was kind of a weakness of this team. And when you shoot like you did against Gonzaga, you can kind of hide that weakness, but we don't play as well, and you still turn the ball over. The lack of a big man kind of becomes a bigger issue when you can't out-rebound the other team and you have trouble scoring. So that was my biggest takeaway. I think it's going to be an issue with this team moving forward. Obviously, the foul trouble to Garrison Brooks in the first half forced Roy Williams to play Sterling Manley and Brandon Huffman some. And I think another thing that UNC fans will definitely harp on is just the use of so many reserves in the first half and at key moments in the first half and in the second half. Playing a lot. Brandon Robinson at times, and just guys that in this caliber of a game. Maybe shouldn't have been playing at that point. I don't know. I guess we're really maybe trying to prove a point and get some guys some experience like he does in lesser talented games. But I think that was kind of an issue there. But of course, it's really his coaching style and something. I don't think it's a huge deal, but the big man thing I think is a big issue. We saw it last year against Texas A&M, and we saw it again now against really good teams with good big men. UNC's going to struggle unless they shoot the lights out like they did against Gonzaga.
I bring in Sherrell McMillan. Sherrell gets the award for the New Dad Award late last night, putting together a high society kitchen for the young one. And Sherrell, get used to it. The gifts get smaller as they get older, but they do get more expensive. You and I have debated the issues with North Carolina before, and we don't necessarily agree, but I'll defer to you because you're much smarter about it than I am. Like I said, Carolina got manhandled against Kentucky, which I didn't think would happen. But your take on how and the why, a big part of what Ross mentioned, certainly a reason.
Yeah, to me, it goes back. I don't want to harp, but I still think they weren't very good defensively, and some of it is systemic. And I think Greg made a great point about it. His column, Ross talked about it. It's just that right now the big guys haven't gotten appreciably better from where they were last year, which would enable North Carolina to play his preferred style, preferred system. And it seems to me that there really isn't that much of a change. Last year it was, if North Carolina gets hot from three, then they'll beat pretty much anybody. And if they don't, they won't. And, through 10 games now, 11 games, that's pretty much where they are again. I think that'll change because I do think that they have more talented players overall than they did last year. It's just taking some time because the talented players who are going to come in and supplement what the seniors do are all freshmen, and it just takes time in North Carolina's system for freshmen to really, really kind of understand when to go, when to attack, when to fall back. And that, like I said, that takes time, and that's going to continue to take time, into the middle of January, into February. And I think, they'll improve, but there are limitations on this team. And I think we've seen them against an opponent like Kentucky, who has size. Reed Travis did it to him last year. Same player, just when he was at Stanford. So it wasn't super surprising that they gave up so many points in the paint. I think what was surprising to everybody was just the carelessness and really lack of urgency when handling the ball. Now, that's something that can and will change, I think. But, you just can't turn the ball over 20 times against good teams and win, like Ross said, unless you're shooting an absurd percentage from three or your offensive efficiency is really off the charts. And that's too much pressure to put on your offense to do every game.
Greg, let's sort of group it together a little bit to have this organized. And we're recording this on Christmas Eve morning. Thus, the shout out to Sherrell for the hard work he did last night in preparation for Santa Claus coming to town. I thought the freshmen looked as shaky as they've looked all year. And that, for me, was surprising, Greg. Did it appear that way in person in Chicago?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's still a steep curve for these guys, and I think that's to be expected. A little bit surprised Leaky Black didn't play more than he did. He only logged, I think, 10 minutes. I think he's the guy that can be a good addition for this team. He has not gotten the minutes I kind of thought he might. But yeah, I mean, Kobe White, he's a guy that you have to have him on the court because he pushes tempo and he's a natural scorer. Now, granted, his shot didn't really fall against Kentucky, but he made some plays. You're like, wow, that's incredible. But at this point in time, not a good defender. And then, Nas Little, I know we can get into him a little bit more because Roy talked about him after the game and Ross put together something about that. But he just continues to kind of try to fill his way around. And I think the lack of a role and kind of some of the struggles that wings have in their freshman year under Roy kind of continue to show up. But, I think Sherrell's right that last year you were able to fill some pieces with some veteran guys. And this year, the guys you're having to rely on are the freshmen. And that's problematic. And Kenny Williams, I thought he played pretty well on Saturday, but we all know that he's been struggling shooting the ball this year. And so when Cam Johnson, especially in the first half, doesn't do a whole lot, and Luke's getting his points from the perimeter, where are your points coming from? And I think that's part of the thing for me is we can talk about all these other pieces, defense and how the freshmen look, and how does Luke looking against true big guys, and not having a rim protector, and the defense and all these kind of things. But I think when you start shining a light on such details, it kind of gets away from what Ross talked about earlier. Time and time again throughout not only Roy's tenure, but when Dean was coaching, when things went awry, what could you do? You pound the ball down low, and you get an easy bucket here or there. You had somebody to go to. Say, look, we need 2 points. Hansbrough, here's the ball. Give us 2 points. Let's stem this tide some. And then you could play good enough defense in the post that it helps you on the other end. And so I truly believe the post presence issue was glaring. We knew that in the offseason. That's not a surprise to anybody. But if that doesn't correct itself, I think the ceiling for this team is much lower than maybe we thought. Unless, like Ross said, you shoot lights out. And that's why I made a big deal about that Gonzaga game, because for them to win a lot of good games against elite teams, they have to shoot the ball very well. Otherwise, what you saw on Saturday is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, I wonder if that Gonzaga game is going to become fool's gold and how well they shot, because it's going to be hard to duplicate that with the offensive limitations. I think we need to spend a little more time talking about Nasir Little. It's a hot topic. I would love to get Sherrell's opinion and Greg's opinion a little bit more on just what's going on there and what can what can happen for him to get more involved and just feel more comfortable and have more success. I think it's just a hot topic with what the criticism from that Bleacher Report article that Roy mentioned in the post game. Like Greg said, I put something together on that about Roy defending, what he's doing with freshmen and just, what's going on with Nasir, and is it him? Is it the offense? Is it how he's being used? I would love to get Sherrell's opinion and for Greg to kind of follow, because I think it's something we have to talk about.
Well, I think what's going on with Nasir isn't much different than what's going on with any freshman who typically plays at North Carolina, who has a player who is good in front of him. And that is that Roy Williams, he'll play the freshman, but he prefers, if he has an option, to play someone with a little more experience. We've all heard it 1,000 times. He loves experienced talent. And right now, Nasir is talent. He's not experienced talent in North Carolina's system. So I think for his standpoint, that's what Roy Williams is thinking is, hey, this is such a great problem to have. I've got Cam Johnson, who shooting lights out from three, is scoring, is doing everything. And then I have another guy who's super athletic, who can come off the bench and give me what I need, for 15 or 20 minutes. So to him, that's all that matters, is that he's got a rotation set up at the three between those two guys that really should be able to help North Carolina, play well. Now, that's maybe a line of thinking that doesn't take into account the entire situation. And what I mean by that is that, in the post-game press conference, he said he didn't care what other people think. And he said, if you think you do, then, that's your problem. And I think when you say that you don't care, that's usually when you do care, and that you've probably read some things and it probably annoyed you and it bothered you. I think the best thing for North Carolina and for Nasir and for Roy Williams is just to continue to go to work, continue to practice, and try to figure out the best way to use them. Now, I think maybe both parties would have liked to have a better plan entering the season about exactly what Little's role was. I think maybe that's not still 100% clear. Is he, a three who attacks from the top of the key and shoots threes, or is he a combo forward who can post and kind of do some things around the basket? I think right now for this particular team, the latter is where he probably, would help the most. I think for his long-term goals, the former is what he wants to be. So there just have to be some conversations, and there has to be some understanding between the two parties of how exactly for, whatever the next 25, 30 games, how Nasir Little can help this North Carolina team improve and hopefully reach its goals.
One thing I'd like to add, I don't know if Roy kind of helped things by bringing that article up and kind of going on a mini rant on that. I think it just draws more attention to that issue and just it makes it more public. And everybody's going to go read that article now because Roy brought it up. And he brings more attention to this notion of how he uses freshmen and if he limits freshmen. I think that was kind of a move by Roy that I wouldn't have recommended. Greg, your thoughts on this here?
Well, we all know, to both your points, we all know that Roy gets his feathers ruffled with some things like that. And so he clearly needed to get his opinion on that article off his chest. And he just happened to do it after the Kentucky game, which is fine. That's who he is, and that's why everybody loves him, and that's why some people hate him. But I think Sherrell's spot on. I think dating back to the preseason, when Ross and I spoke with Roy and Charlotte for ACC Operation Basketball deal, we knew that they were going to start playing some small ball because Roy was open that, hey, the bigs are not developing as fast as I had hoped, therefore we are going to play small. But he also said that Cam Johnson was the guy getting the majority of the minutes at the 4. And the reason that happens, and we've seen it over the years, the same reason that he plays freshmen solely at point, and he doesn't move them off to 2 most of the time, is because he wants those guys, the young guys, to learn their positions. So he wanted Nas Little to learn the 3. So early in the year when they're playing small, it was Cam Johnson logging all those minutes at the 4. And so while you had a month or a month and a half in the preseason to work on small ball, it was Cam playing in the post. And so I think that's part of the issues because as we're 11 games into this year, the opportunity to field a quality traditional 2-big lineup is kind of going by the wayside. You have to be able to play that lineup for stretches of time, or else you're going to get run out of the building against a big team like A&M was last year. So Roy's got to protect against that, and he's got to make sure he at least has a fighting chance in those games. But it's pretty clear the most talent on the floor is when you go small. But now we're in a situation where you probably won't Nas at the 4 anyway because he is a bigger, stronger version of what you're looking for. I like the fact that Roy put him on Reed Travis for some stretches in that game Saturday. Now, it didn't work out well, but Reed Travis is a really good player. I mean, he's a first-team Pac-12 guy. He's, I think, first-team preseason SEC. So he's going to win that matchup regardless. And that's not something you can put on Nas for losing that matchup.
And he's a grown man.
Oh, yeah, he's a hoss. No doubt about it. So you can't really criticize Nas for that, but I think the opportunity for him to learn in that way is a good thing, and that's what you got to continue to do. But to Sherrell's point, with Nas not having a ton of practice at the 4 in the preseason, or as it sounds anyway, he's kind of behind the chain some, and he's got to catch up because I do think he doesn't do you a lot of good if he's just jacking up threes or pull up 16-footers. That's not where Nas Little is going to help you. Teams are going to give you that. But when he gets into the paint and he can be explosive and uses athleticism, that's where he's dangerous. And so whether it's helping him with a few post moves so he can actually post somebody up, I think that would be a great asset for him. Or if you just get him driving more. But there's some things like that have to transpire because, as we've talked about, it just seems like at times he gets out there and he's not exactly sure what he needs to be doing. And that looks bad for him, but it also looks bad for the coaching staff.
Let me take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue this discussion because it's definitely an important one. It definitely has Inside Carolina message boards lit up discussing it, especially after Ross mentioned Roy Williams' comments. We'll come back and we'll keep at it. Sherrell, I want to bring you in again on it. And, watching the Kentucky game, I had somebody in my ear fussing that Roy doesn't play the freshman. And I'm like, do you see the kid running point? And folks tend to forget that. But when you're talking about Nas Little, I watch him against Kentucky, and I'm thinking, how many more minutes does he deserve when he's as lost as he appears? But then again, how can he get found if he doesn't get minutes to figure it out? Sherrell, that's the $64,000 question, at least I have, and that's why the coaches make the big bucks.
Yeah, that's right. Roy Williams has a new 8-year contract extension that he signed last week. I think, and I don't mean to harp, but I think what people have to realize is that with Nasir, what's going on with him is not new at North Carolina. And that's not meant to be negative. It is just the reality in that freshmen at North Carolina typically have a steep learning curve, and freshmen at North Carolina have to figure out exactly what to do when. They have to figure out how to attack. They have to figure out all these things, and it takes time. And, I don't want to name names or anything, but I think Carolina fans would be shocked to learn about how many of their favorite freshmen who ended up going on to have great careers were either, not exactly happy with their role, not really sure about what they were supposed to be doing their first, 10, 15, 20 games in North Carolina. It is just something that happens. It's the thing we always hear is paralysis by analysis. That's what I promise you, if you go back and we talk to so many parents and players, that's what they say. They say, we're just processing so much information. We're not exactly sure what to do. We're not being instinctual, all those kind of things. We've heard that for years and years and years. So Nasir is currently going through that. It's magnified because he is, a projected top 5 pick. Some people had him as high as number 2 or number 1. So it's magnified because of that. And because, North Carolina has had an issue, I guess you could say, with landing, top 5, quote unquote, elite talent. So throw all that in a bowl together and then remove UNC's ability to play, I would say really well, is desired style. And then you start to get these issues. Add on the fact that there are 2 guys down the road who play a lot and shoot a lot and score a lot and putting up huge numbers. And all this just becomes like the perfect storm of stuff.
I'll add something here. To Greg's point, I love the idea of Nasir playing 4 at the power forward spot. I think that's a great position for him with Cam at the 3, because Cam's having a pretty good season. And he feels like more of a wing enough. He kind of has that Theo Pinson body, but he's taller. He can maneuver down there and he can bang with the big boys down low. I think that's a great chance for him. I know that's not his NBA position, but it's a chance for him to have the most impact this season. And a little bit to what Sherrell said, I think the clamor and the excitement on Twitter for Nasir and all the issues that people are having is the fact that most fans think, kind of only going to have him for 1 year, and they kind of want that instant gratification. They see what's going on at Duke. They want him to have success now, even though it does take a while for some UNC freshmen to kind of develop. You remember John Henson? He was a guy who struggled as a freshman. Even Harrison Barnes a little bit, but they went on to really good UNC careers in year 2 and year 3. I think the notion here is that a lot of people know they're only going to have Nasir for 20 more games, 25 more games, and that they want to see him have success now. And that kind of just, that urgency is what is bringing this kind of stress. You want him to have success from a fan's perspective now and have him scoring in double figures regularly and dominating like some of the big freshmen are around the country.
Sherrell, I'm going to come back to you to sort of wrap this topic up. You mentioned that a lot of guys struggled their freshman year, and there's plenty recently, but I remember one, and certainly he wasn't on the level that these guys we talk about are, but Donald Williams was not good his freshman year. And we see what he did. Now, he did that as a sophomore junior. And to Ross's point, I think the fans are more concerned about it than anybody. Now, there's some concern elsewhere, but the fans wanting to see what Little can do in his possibly short stint at North Carolina. But how much of it is driven by what other freshmen are doing around the country as far as the angst that maybe the fan base and the mess that Coach Williams has to deal with when he's, talking about it in post-game press conferences? I mean, how much is it from that situation?
Oh, the angst from Roy Williams, we know, has nothing to do with that at all. I mean, that's completely about the team. And, now if people want to say, you can't build 3 or 4 year chemistry in 25 games, like Ross said, that's a valid point, because I think, Roy Williams is taking the approach that he took with, many other talented freshmen. And a lot of those guys, sans really Marvin Williams, stayed for at least a couple of years. Now, the expectation, I think, with Nasir is that he's not going to stay for more than 1 year. He certainly could, and I think, Roy Williams would be happy to have him back, but I don't think you can expect that. So you're kind of like building a world of chemistry for year 2 and 3, but you only have 30 games. And so the pieces aren't aligned there. In general, I don't want to do a deep dive into the psyche of North Carolina fans, but, absolutely the angst is caused to some degree by how successful the guys down the road have been with using one and done players and inserting them into the lineup, immediately. For them, it's kind of, they couldn't get a top 10 guy. They couldn't get a top 10 guy. They couldn't get a top 10 guy. They finally get a top 10 guy. He's ready to go. He has, shines bright on the high school all-star circuit. He's compelling. He's interesting. He's skilled. He's athletic. He's got all these things. And then he gets to campus and, Roy Williams is bringing him off the bench, and they feel like he isn't playing as well as he could, or I feel like he's not getting an opportunity. So, yeah, definitely all that adds into the kind of, I don't want to say firestorm, because it's still very, very early in the season, but all that adds to the angst that I think the Carolina fan base has.
Let me take another quick break, and we'll come back. Let's talk about some different players other than Nas Little. We'll be right back. Greg, let's talk about the upperclassmen, because I think they're fair game as well. We've seen some highs and lows. Kenny Williams has struggled basically all year, at least scoring the basketball. But your thoughts on the performance of those guys? Now, Cam Johnson's been fantastic at times, but for me watching, Kentucky is a game that you got to have your seniors just blow up and do really well. Even though it's gotten to be a freshman, sophomore game, that is where North Carolina, I think, has had success in big games, is they've had those seniors and upperclassmen really stand out. And it hasn't happened as much as maybe folks would like this season.
Yeah, I guess I'm, I don't know, I'm old school, if I'm just old. I don't know what it is, but I like the game of the seniors. I mean, I think Cam Johnson's North Carolina's best player this year. He has been thus far. I think Luke May played a good game against Kentucky. He played a really good game against Gonzaga. I think the issue with Kentucky, though, is that Luke is a stretch four. And when he plays a stretch four role, he's obviously an All-American. But against some guys that have a lot of length, he's got to score in unique ways. And that's what we saw on Saturdays. He's able to knock down some threes. And he's not as effective off the glass as we've seen him. But Travis is a hoss, and PJ Washington and some of those guys are long and lean. And that's a challenge to ask Luke May at his size and with his skill set to go in the post and dominate those matchups. It's not going to happen. That's not fair to him to ask him to do that. But I think he thrived in kind of his role. I thought he was good, and he gave the team a boost. He kept the team in the game at times when Kentucky was trying to pull away, and he made some big baskets. And then Kenny Williams, yes, his shot's not been going in. But I mean, he had 6 rebounds, he had 5 assists, had a couple steals. He had drew a charge early. So while his shot has not been falling, he's figured out how to contribute without scoring. And that's a lot easier said than done, because a lot of guys over the years, and Kenny even early in his career, if the shot's not falling, they just kind of get lost and they vanish and they don't contribute anywhere. And you're like, okay, well, what's this guy doing? That's not been the case for Kenny. And on top of the numbers, Roy's talked about how he's really kind of been the Energizer bunny, if you will, in terms of providing enthusiasm and getting the guys up. And I think you saw that on Saturday, especially early. He really kind of rallied the troops when some of the guys kind of had big eyes with the atmosphere. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that the seniors need to do a little bit more. But I think for the most part, they've played pretty well. I just think when you're so sloppy, take care of the ball, which has been an issue. The defense is as bad as it's been. I mean, I thought it was fascinating after the game, and this is not something none of us knew. Everybody knows this. But Calipari said, North Carolina, the way that they play defense forces you to take a lot of threes. And we've had that discussion ad nauseum over the years, right? Because Roy Williams is going to he's going to help. He's going to do everything that he can to stop the easy buckets down low. And what does that do? That leaves open the outside shots. And so if a team is talented enough to make a lot of threes, and Kentucky didn't shoot a high percentage, and they only shot 35% from three. But when everything else is going kind of going their way, for them to be able to step up and knock down some threes, and the Hero Kid or Hero Kid, however you pronounce his name, and Keldon Johnson, those guys can knock down some big threes that can kind of limit UNC's ability to get back in the game. This is kind of a game changer. And so a lot of different things to me are a much bigger factor than how the upperclassmen have played.
Yeah, I mean, I think Greg hit on some good points with the seniors. I think Johnson and May are having good I mean, I think Cam Johnson's having a great season mostly. And I think Luke May set the bar so high last year that what he's doing now is really good. It's just not those 30-point games he had at some points. And a lot of that came in the second half of last season or kind of more in ACC play. So you're still waiting for that really big breakout game, but he was great against Gonzaga. I think one thing that it's important to know, I mean, UNC lost by 8 points against Kentucky, but they were in the game for the majority of the time. I think it was, somewhere between 4 and 6 points for the majority of the second half of the second half. So it's not like they were ran out of the gym by Kentucky and they turned the ball over 17 times. So while I think a lot of people are jumping off the UNC bandwagon right now and seeing this team is not going to make it a deep run and they have a lot of issues, it was still a really competitive game. It wasn't like the Michigan game. It didn't have that feel. UNC was a three-pointer away from cutting it to maybe one possession, I think, at times, or at least cutting it to 4 or 5 points. And so I think Kentucky's a pretty good team with a lot of talent. They probably played one of their – I mean, they didn't play their best game, but, that effort was there. They have a lot of good players and a lot of guys had great games. So I think Kentucky's a Sweet 16 type team. And even though – and obviously UNC didn't play their best game and didn't have a great performance from Kobe White, Nasir Little, Kenny Williams, and some other players, they were still kind of in it the whole game. So, just another one of those weird games like the Michigan game where a lot of things didn't go UNC's way, but still some things did, appear, the interior scoring, the interior defense, turnover issues that are becoming more of a trend now than a one-off. And so while it wasn't a super beat-down loss, there are still some issues with this team that I think they have to address moving forward.
And I think, if you had talked to people before the season and looked through this stretch, I think North Carolina's just one game behind schedule, to be honest. Because I think realistically, people would have said, yeah, at Michigan, that's going to be a tough one. And one of Gonzaga or Kentucky is going to be tough to get. So really, it's just the Texas game that is, I think, coloring a lot of North Carolina season thus far. You never want to have 3 losses this early. But I am a firm believer that those things can help you later on, not necessarily losing, but just the lessons learned in the loss. I think Kobe will just, for example, will be more careful with the ball, I think, moving forward. I think this is one of those games where he got a little excited and, the tempo was up and it was a good crowd, like Greg said, and, things can start to snowball. But I think when that happens again, when he plays at NC State or plays at Duke or plays at, any of these tough environments in the ACC, he can have some kind of muscle memory and say, remember that Kentucky game where North Carolina was down 6 and, they had a chance to go down and cut it to the one possession game and Ashton Hagans ripped the ball from me. They hit a 3, then they had to dunk and the game was over. I can't do that again. And this is what I need to do in order to make sure that doesn't happen. So I think those kind of lessons are invaluable. But, overall, I'm still not down on this North Carolina team. I think the ceiling does look a little different than I imagined, just because the parts aren't moving really efficiently together yet. But I still think they can do a lot of good things, and they've shown that when they're making shots, they can beat anyone in the country. So it's just a little variance from where North Carolina typically is, in that they have to work a little differently to score, but they're still when they're scoring at their best, they're as good as anybody. So I would just urge everyone to remember that it's still December and ACC play hasn't started yet. And there's anything we've learned from Roy Williams teams as far as giving the benefit of the doubt, they do typically tend to get better in January and February. They'll have an inexplicable loss at some point again this season, and they'll have a win that looks so ugly and so bad. And you're like, what are they doing? And after that win, they'll go and win 6 or 7 straight, and you'll start looking at things and like, oh, they're in place to get a 3 seed or a 4 seed. So until that doesn't happen, I think you have to give his team and his coaching staff and his players a benefit of the doubt and assume that's what will happen.
Real quick, Greg, what was the atmosphere like in the locker room, or however you spoke with the players? I remember after the Texas loss, Kobe White was devastated, but what was the vibe like with the players in the locker room?
Yeah, I think there's frustration. I think the effort thing is problematic, and I think it is really kind of irritated Luke May. And I think Kobe, you bring up a good point there. I think Kobe has been around long enough now, even though it's only been 6 weeks since the season actually started, that he was a little more even-keeled, and he was trying to provide answers to what had happened and where they need to improve, which I think that's normally what happens. That's good to see that he's kind of moving into that role, which shows some experience. But I think they knew that they got beat up pretty good, even though the score was only 8 points. They kind of got whooped up on them. And I wanted to add one thing to what Sherrell said, because I think he's exactly right. When I'm watching that game Saturday, really through the first, 25, 30 minutes before Kentucky really kind of salted it away, I'm watching the Wildcats and I'm thinking, this is a collection of talent. They do not play like a team. A lot of very good talent, and they're kind of thriving in this moment. But when you compare that game they played Saturday to what North Carolina did against Gonzaga, the Gonzaga win was a team game for the Tar Heels. And they looked like a well-polished team. And that's what Roy Williams gets his teams to do by the end of the year. They look like they are supposed to look, and the pieces fit together. I've never really gotten that opinion watching a lot of Cal's teams with all these freshmen, all these young guys playing. You just kind of rely on the talent to beat out any need for team chemistry, which is one of the reasons I like Tony Bennett. It's because his teams play like a team. There's not one guy that dominates. And that's how Roy's wired. And so I think that's just kind of, as the season plays out, they always get better. This team will get better. How that team looks come March is another matter. But they clearly have a lot of growing to do.
All right, guys. Greg kind of did what I wanted to do, but I'll start with you, Ross. Give me 1 or 2 thoughts heading into. I know they've got a game before the end of the year, but heading into the post-Christmas as Carolina gets into ACC play after the new year. 1 or 2 things maybe that might be on a wish list for Coach Roy Williams and his Tar Heels.
Garrison Brooks or Sterling Manley to step up and be a dominant force inside, not necessarily offensively, but just as a very consistent rebounder and defender down low where he can trust them to play and maybe give 8 to 10 points a game. One of those guys to do that, 8 to 10 points, 8 to 10 rebounds.
Sherrell?
Commitment to defense is what North Carolina, what Williams wants, and that ties into effort a little bit. They scored 72 points against Kentucky and they didn't play well offensively. They're going to be able to score. If they defend, then they can do a lot of things this season.
Indeed. I think defense, especially interior defense, the point was made, and I can't remember, I think you made it, Ross, earlier in the show, that whenever Carolina back in the day needed a basket, they could throw it inside and get it. And I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but one thing Carolina's got to be able to do is prevent other teams from being able to do that. And I thought Reed Travis pretty much got whatever he wanted against North Carolina, and it's happened before. It'll be interesting for me to watch whether the Gonzaga game was a one-off or the Gonzaga game is the potential for this North Carolina team.
And Tommy, let me add one more since we're going to throw everything into the pot here. North Carolina's opponents are averaging 17.3 points off turnovers per game. That is not going to get it done, especially considering the level of competition UNC has played in some of these games. That helps us. I mean, Gonzaga's taken advantage of them in that regard. Kentucky has. Michigan did. So when you're giving up 20-plus points to the best teams in the country off turnovers, that is too easy. And so, yes, defense, yes, post presence, but you got to do a better job taking care of the ball. So that's three really big things that have to turn for the Tar Heels going into the new year.
Man, UNC could have used a transfer like Reed Travis this year. That would have made this team kind of more complete. I think Armando Bacot, he's going to have a chance to start next year.
Yep. If they protect the basketball, play a little defense, I think Carolina can be really good. Folks just need to have patience, but as we know, patience is in short supply these days. Guys, Ross, Greg, Sherrell, I appreciate you taking time to do this on Christmas Eve. I hope you guys have a nice holiday and a safe one. We'll talk soon.
See you, Tommy.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Thanks for listening to InsideCarolina.com, the independent voice of UNC Sports. Your home for Tar Heel football, basketball, and recruiting.